what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Fishing with Flair. Today I have a video over my top 5 fall to winter transition baits. These are the 5 baits that have worked best for me. They may not work the best for you or anybody else, but these are the baits that I like to throw because when it comes to winter and fall time, like late fall time fishing, sometimes you have to throw baits that you really don't like throwing, really finesse baits. I'm more of a power fisherman. And these are the baits that I enjoy throwing while fishing fall to winter transition. As of right now, all the lakes around me are frozen. They froze up a few weeks ago. And so I'm just going to kind of go over this for the people that live farther south than I do or have lakes that are open. And hopefully what you learn today will help you catch some more fish. So we'll get into it. I have 5 baits that worked for me in the fall to winter transition. I didn't do too much fishing this fall. I had the tournament down in Louisiana. When I got home from that, I was just so burnt out, not necessarily from fishing, but traveling and everything, and I kind of put everything away and only made it out on my boat maybe a handful more times. Didn't do any more tournaments after that, and kind of season kind of came to an end. So, but these are the baits that I found worked this year and last year in the past, in a few years back, and so we'll get right into it. Five baits, and I'll start off with the fastest paced one and then the slowest paced one as far as retrieval speed. So the first bait that I like to throw in the fall to winter transition, and this is anywhere from 50-degree water and less. Some of this I will throw in 35-degree water, and then some of it I'll have to throw in 40-degree water, and I will go over that as well. So the first bait is a Livingston Lures Pro Gripper. This is a lipless crankbait made by Livingston Lures. This is one of my favorite baits to throw when the water is in the mid-40s, low 40s, and the reason why I like the Livingston Lures one the most is because for the size of the bait, it's the lightest, it's not real heavy, and it has electronic bait fish sounds, and it's not overly loud. When you're fishing in the winter time in really cold water, you kind of want to have a finesse presentation. You don't want real loud banging around noise and stuff like that. And this one, as you can hear, it's real quiet rattles as well as the electronic bait fish sound, so it's more subtle, which is why I like it. And like I said, it's lighter, so on the fall it's a little bit slower. It kind of shimmies down on the fall a little bit slower than maybe a KVD or an actual rattle trap brand crankbait, lipless crankbait. Those are just a couple reasons why I like the Livingston ones, but mainly I just like this profile because you can rip it and pause it, let it go down to the bottom, kind of like an injured bait fish, and then rip it back up again and let it fall back down. Or you can just keep your rod tip high, slowly reel it in just so it's barely shimming along. As far as depth-wise goes, I'd maybe stay in between 5 and 10 feet with this bait, depending on where the bass are. I mean, I fished a couple lakes this fall where I caught bass in 1.5 feet, 2 feet of water, and there was a couple more where I had to find them offshore in rock piles in about 15 feet of water. So yeah, Livingston Lure lipless crankbait would be the one for the warmest water leading into the winter. The next one would be a jerkbait. Right here is the Livingston Lures jerkbait, and this one I would use. I'll just go into why jerkbait. Jerkbait because you can pause it. It is a reaction bait. You can jerk it back and forth, make erratic actions, and they will strike. But the best thing about having a jerkbait tied on is you can let it pause and it'll sit there. And the bass can look up at it, and they see it sitting there, and you give it a couple more twitches, and it really imitates an injured bait fish. And it's a little bit easier of a meal than something like a lipless crankbait. That's why I like to go with the jerkbait when the water's a little bit colder. 40, I mean, it'll work in 50, 60, 70-degree water, but I really like it in about 40 degrees of water because you can jerk it and just let it sit there. Sometimes I've let it sit there for 30 seconds to a minute, and the bass will strike it. Bass are opportunists. If there's a meal sitting right in front of them, they will eat it regardless of they're hungry or not. As long as they don't have to exert a lot of energy for it, they're going to do that. And with the jerkbait, they're not going to have to. The 2 different sizes I like, and this one is the Livingston Lures jerkbait. It's a full-sized, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 inch bait. Goodness. So you can see there, it's a pretty big size bait. I will go to a smaller one as the water gets colder, or if the fish are smaller, it'll kind of just depend on the lake, and then I can use something like this one. I believe this one is a Rip and Lips one. Any brand will really work, but that's just the one I pulled out of my box. You can see the difference in sizes So depending on how big the bass are in your area will kind of determine the size of jerkbait that I'll choose, or the size of bait fish I can say too. That'll work as well. Next in the line is a drop shot. Now personally I don't like throwing a drop shot. I would much rather throw a shaky head or finesse jig or something like that. But sometimes when it comes to wintertime fishing, fall time fishing, a drop shot is a necessity, because what you do with the drop shot is you have a weight in your line hanging down here. And in the water, this is a Gambler, this is a WEBO, it'll float, the plastic will float. So your worm's going to be kind of sticking out kind of like this, a little bit, maybe a little bit lower. And all you got to do is you got to keep your line tight and then just slowly kind of twitch your rod. And this will make the worm kind of quiver. And depending on how long the leader is, I usually base that off of, you know, how deep the bass are. If the bass are right on the bottom, then I'll have maybe a 4-inch leader. If they're a couple feet off, then I might have a 2-foot leader. But this one, I like it because it presents a really easy meal, because when the worm is sitting out horizontal or pretty close to it and you're just kind of sitting there shaking it, if the bass comes up on it and you're just sitting there shaking it, like I said, they're opportunists. They're going to do it if it's an easy meal. And with a drop shot, you can keep the bait in the strike zone as long as you really want. You can just keep it there, you don't have to move it, and you can give the bait action without actually moving the position of the lure. That's why I like using the drop shot. And this one is a little bit more on the, not necessarily reaction side, but like I said, I'm going to go from fast moving baits down to the slowest moving baits, and that's the third in line. Fourth one would be a shaky head. This one is a Gambler SWEEBO worm with, I believe that's a Power Team Lures shaky head on there. And I like throwing a shaky head year round. I throw it in the summer, spring, fall, winter, but I do like throwing it, and how I will throw it is cast it out, and this is probably when I'll fish a little bit deeper, maybe 5 foot or deeper, and I'll drag it, and you slowly, you kind of work it just like a drop shot, how you just kind of quiver your rod, just kind of moving your slack line a little bit. And it keeps your bait down towards the bottom. In the winter, I noticed a lot of the bass that I found aren't as suspended. As the water gets really cold, you know, 35, 40 degrees, they kind of hunker it down to the bottom and they don't really move much. So when you're using something like a shaky head, and it's down on the bottom right in the strike zone, it'll stand up kind of like this because it's a shaky head, kind of stand up vertical, and if the bass are sitting on the bottom, then the worm is kind of right in the strike zone, just kind of like a drop shot. But I'll pick that over a drop shot when I'm fishing a little bit deeper, or if the bass are towards the bottom more than suspended, then I'll go with a shaky head worm. Like I said, you just cast it out there, you know, between 5 and 25 feet of water, you can fish one. And you just kind of slowly drag it. You can sometimes do a couple of pops, couple of hops, stuff like that. Depending on, let the bass tell you what they want. You can try a few different things. But I like it because it stays on the bottom and it's a real easy meal. And it stands up, so that way it's a little bit easier to see than something like a jig. Speaking of jigs, my last lure is going to be a finesse jig. This one I like to throw probably when I'm around bigger bass. It seems like the jig will do better than something like a shaky head or a drop shot or something like that. And I have a couple of them laid out here. This is kind of your standard finesse jig. I don't know what brand it is. It's just a ball jig head with a skirt, and it's kind of trimmed up like that for the finesse jig. Here's a Stanley Jigs one. So you can see they're real small profile, real finesse looking with a small crawfish trailer on it. And then I have a finesse football head made by EcoPro Tungsten. See there, that one, this is a non-trim skirt versus a trim skirt, and I'll show you the difference. So you can see there, this one has the skirt trimmed and this one doesn't. So you can see the difference. The reason why I would trim the skirt, it gives it a smaller profile, as well as when you trim it and it kind of has that like little bit of ruffles around the collar of it, as you can see there. It's just a little bit smaller, more finesse, easier meal for the bass to bite. And then here is another, this is an EcoPro. It's just like a regular flipping jig, but it's a smaller one, and just kind of showing you the size of the jigs. As far as trailers, I would find something that has the littlest movement. As you can see on the Stanley Jigs one, if you can see that, they're just regular crawfish pinchers. They're not flapping pinchers. They have no movement whatsoever besides when you're moving the lure itself. So I would stay with small profile. You can trim the skirt. If I'm around bigger bass, I might not trim it, because with the longer strands, the slower the movement of the the skirt is. And so if you're kind of slowly moving it and the skirt's kind of pulsating real slow because there's really long strands, sometimes that'll help. So if I'm around bigger bass, I'll probably keep it like this. And if I'm around smaller bass, and by smaller bass I mean, you know, 2 pounds and less, then I might try something a little bit smaller like the finesse jig there. Like I said, for trailers, keep it really simple. I would try to imitate crawfish, maybe bluegill or shad that's kind of dead laying on the bottom. And you basically just want to cast it out there on the same place you would throw a shaky head, a drop shot, anything on the bottom, whether it's rocks or wood or timber or whatever. And you just kind of want to slowly drag it like you would a football head jig, but it's just a little bit smaller. So you can use a spinning rod, maybe 12-pound line, something small. Slowly drag it, like similar to you would to a shaky head. It's just a different profile. You know, you got to let the bass tell you what they want. If they're feeding up on crawfish, then you're going to want to pick a jig. So, you know, that's pretty much it for the 5 different baits. Like I have the lipless crankbait, and that's when the water's starting to get colder, you know, around 50 degrees or so. They work, all of these baits work all year round. I'm just talking about which ones I like to use during the fall to winter time when the water gets really cold. They work best for me. I'm sure there's multiple different baits that you could use besides what I talked about. But these are the ones that work for me. So like I said, lipless crankbait, a jerkbait. For jerkbaits, remember the pause is really important. The cadence is important. Whether it's 1 twitch, 3 twitches, and a pause. Let the bass tell you what they want. So try different things. Don't be afraid to let it pause for a minute or more. I've had to do that. I think this spring I was fishing a few tournaments, and that's how some of the guys were winning, was letting it pause for a minute and a half, and then they'd hit it. So I learned something new there. Drop shot, I would use when the water's somewhat cold, you know, 45, 50 degrees, not super cold, and it just has a little bit more movement than a shaky head, and it keeps your bait in the strike zone a little bit longer if the bass are suspended. So if the bass aren't on the bottom, pick up the drop shot. If the bass are on the bottom, I'd pick up a shaky head or a finesse jig, depending on what the bass are feeding on, depending on what they want. Let them tell you. But you know, some of the key things: keep your bait small, compact, light. Don't use a huge, heavy, like this shaky head. I got the big one just because of video purposes, but normally I'd probably use like 1/8 of an ounce. You want a slow presentation. The bass don't want to exert a bunch of energy because the water's cold, and so you want it easy, make it an easy meal for them to eat. Small, compact, lightweight, and I think I kind of went through everything. As far as location, maybe some of you guys are still wondering. It just depends on the lake. I don't want to tell you one thing because it may not work for you, but I would just focus. I would start shallow and go deep is how I would approach winter and fall fishing. It's just start throwing a rattle trap up shallow. Try it for, you know, half an hour. Try spinnerbait maybe. If it doesn't work, then just work your way out. Slow down and work your way out deep until you find the bass. So that's it for today's episode. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hopefully you guys learned something. If you have any questions, comments, anything, any video suggestions, I am definitely open to any of that. I read all the comments. Follow me on social media. Go subscribe to my other YouTube channel, Flair Fishing Reviews. And that's it for today's episode. Thanks for watching.